Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. So there's two main topics to today's class. One is what a universal gate is, and then we're going to talk about two different forms of logic circuits. We've talked about SOP, sum of products, and POS, product of sums, but there are other logic circuitry. And today we're going to go over NAND, and NOR. Okay, so the lecture should be about an hour, and then there's the activity. And it's important what I'm talking about up here, so unless you're taking notes on your computer, you should be listening, because it does have to do with today's activity. And also, in order to do the second part of Lab 1, you need this information, okay? All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about are universal gates. And NAND gates and NOR gates are called universal gates. And what universal gate means is that you can make all the other gates out of these gates. So, we talked about a NOT gate, we talked about an AND, an OR, and NOR. Well, you can use a NAND to give you a NOT. And also, you can use NANDs, plural, to give you an AND. And also, you can use NAND gates to get an OR and a NOR. And the same thing with the NOR gate, that you can get all these other gates using either a single NOR gate or multiple NOR gates. So here in class, I'm going to show you how to use a NAND gate as a NOT, an AND, an OR, and a NOR. And then one part of the activity today is for you to do the same using a NOR gate. Okay, so if you understand what I do for a NAND, you should be able to do what you need to do for the activity for a NOR. Okay? So, we're going to start showing how you can use a NAND as a NOT gate. Remember, a NOT gate is an inverter. Right? How does the output compare to the input for a NOT gate? Opposite. Right, it's just the opposite. Right? You put a 1 in, you get a 0 out. Put a 0 in, you get a 1 out. Now you can see here, I have the truth table for a NAND gate. You remember with the NAND gate, the output is just the opposite of an AND. And remember, an AND, you get a 1 out as long as all the inputs are a 1. Well, a NAND, you only get a 0 out when all the inputs are 1. Right? Otherwise, you're 1. Let's just see. Okay. Well, one way that I can get a NOT gate from a NAND, there's actually two ways to do it. And I'll show you both. But one of the ways that you can connect a NAND gate so it acts like a NOT gate is you just take the two inputs and you physically connect them together. So that's what I mean here. We're connecting the two inputs together. And when you connect inputs together, that forces the inputs to be the same value. Right? Effectively, by connecting these inputs together, we've made the truth table 2 rows instead of 4 rows. Right? By making that physical connection, either both inputs are 0 or both inputs are 1. There's no way, once you make them physically connected, that one could be 0 and the other one could be 1. Now, this is where having some circuits helps. And again, you're not going to be tested on circuits, and circuits is not a requirement for this class. But if you've had circuits, you know that when you make a connection, right, it's called a node, and that node has the same voltage. Okay, and we talked about how, zeros are typically 0 volts and 1 is, some plus amount of voltage. So, if you had some circuits, this should make total sense, right? Because this is all the same node, so it has the same voltage. Okay. Well, look, if you put a 0 on both of these inputs, you're going to get a 1 out. And if you put a 1 on both of these inputs, you're going to get a 0 out. So you see, you take a NAND gate, connect the two inputs together, and it's acting like a NOT gate, because that's what a NOT gate does, right? Whatever's on the input, you get the opposite out. And that's what we have here by connecting the two inputs with the NAND gate. All right, so does anybody have a question on that? How how this is working as a NOT. Okay, there's another way you can make a NAND gate into a NOT. Okay, and this other way is by looking at the way you come up with it is by looking at the bottom two rows of the truth table. Okay, so you see I put that green dash on. So just look at the bottom two rows. If you look at the bottom two rows, look at what it's telling us. If we connect one input to a NAND gate to a 1, look how the other input compares to the output. If I connect one input to an NAND gate as a 1, well, if that other input's a 0, the output's a 1, and if that other input's a 1, the output's a 0. So you see, if I connect one input of a NAND gate to a 1, I've got an inverter between the other input and the output. Okay, so you see, if I did this, if I just connected, say, A to a 1, well, now I have an inverter between B and the output. Okay, so 2 ways to make a NAND gate into a NOT. Any question on the second one? Now, in a circuit, a 1 would be like some plus voltage, like plus 5 volts. You would just connect that input to plus 5. Okay. All right. Well, now let's see how you can make an AND gate using NAND. You'll see you'll have to have 2 NANDs to do this. Now, this goes back to what was it? I think it was a week ago, right? When we talked about gates. What is NAND short for? Not AND. So what is a NAND gate equal to? Why do we call it not AND? Yeah, it's an AND with the inverter on the output, right? Remember we talked about that a NAND is equivalent to an AND with an inverter on the output. Well, now, if I put another inverter on the output, well, these 2 inverters would basically cancel out, right? So you see, if I did this, right, this is my NAND, right? Because we said a NAND is equal to an AND with an inverted output. And now, if I use a NAND to do this inversion, right, again, we can tie the 2 inputs together. Well, these 2 together is an AND, right? Because this NAND as an inverter is basically canceling out that inverter that's part of this NAND, and you end up with just an AND. Right? So you say we take 2 NAND gates to get an AND gate. You just take a NAND and connect it up at its output to a NAND that's acting like an inverter. Okay, so does everybody see what I did here? Does that make sense? Okay, you ready for the next one? Okay, the next one is using NANDs. You're going to see we need multiple NANDs to act like an OR. Okay, now this goes back to De Morgan's theorem. Okay, remember we talked about De Morgan's theorem? We've been using De Morgan's theorem, every class since the 2nd class, I think, right? I think I first talked about it in the 2nd class, and we used it last class, right? Because every time you go SOP to POS or POS to SOP, right, you're using De Morgan. And remember, it has 2 parts to it, right? What's the part of De Morgan's that involves a NAND? We say that a NAND is equal to what? Not A plus not B. Okay, that's the equation part. So a NAND is equal to what kind of gate? Or with inverters where? Inputs. There we go. Right. That a NAND is equal to an OR with inverted input. That's the short way of saying it. So I can write a NAND from De Morgan's theorem. Remember, I can write a NAND as an OR with inverters on the input. But De Morgan's tells us that a NAND is equal to this. Well, can you see that if I do this? This is a NAND here. Well, look, if I put inverters on the input of this NAND, that's the same equivalence to this OR with inverted inputs, I essentially will cancel out those inverters at the input of the OR. So you see, if I did this, see, I put inverters, it's the same as, see, putting these NAND gates as inverters here at the input of this NAND is the same as putting inverters at the input of this OR that has inverters at the input. Right, so those effectively would cancel out, and now this equals the OR. See, this would be an OR gate. Equivalent of an OR gate. See that? Is that harder to see? I mean, it's similar to what we did here, right? It's just we put the inverter at the output to cancel this out. Here we're putting the inverters on the input to cancel the inverters. Okay. So is everybody okay with this one? This is the one that sometimes gives people trouble, but I think it's mainly with the more.
Wait, so we go over how you went from the OR gate to the AND gate on like the right side for the big one?
This right here?
Yeah.
Well, this is De Morgan's. I mean, you said De Morgan's as an equation when you were talking about.
Oh, so that was that equation right there, just kind of put in there.
Yeah, this is like the symbology of the equation that a NAND is equal to an OR with inverted inputs. So you see this here is a NAND. Now to make it an OR, we've got to get rid of these inverters, and we do that with additional inverters. Cancel it. Okay. All right, well now, let's look at this. A NAND is a NOR. Well, what's NOR short for? NAND is short for not AND, NOR is short for not OR. So a NOR, as we said earlier, a NOR is the same as an OR with an inverter at the output. Well, here's our NAND gate as an OR. Right? So, you know, we can draw this over again. And I just redrew this. And now what would we have to do here to make it a NOR? Is this here is a NAND gate, NAND gates as an OR. So to get a NOR, what do I have to do? Just another inverter on the output. So I just write this inverter as a NAND inverter. Right? Just put another NAND as an inverter. So you see, it would take 4 NAND gates to make a NOR. 3 NAND gates to make an OR, 2 NAND gates to make an AND. You just need a single NAND gate for an OR. There's 2 different ways to do it. Okay? Now, maybe what some of you are thinking, and you know, this question came up around this point this morning, and that's, you know, basically, so what? Like, why would you want to do this, right? Because, you know, I thought we want to use the least number of gates, because, you know, when we talked about SOP and POS, right, the 2 different forms, remember the reason why having different forms of logic circuitry is good is because one form might give you less terms, meaning less gates than another form, right? And that can be advantageous sometimes, right? Because it's less, you know, gates, you know, less components. Well, the reason why you might want to do everything in one gate, if you can. Now, you know, this is somewhat not as important as it used to be. I mean, when I took this class, you know, eons ago, and even up to maybe like 20 years ago or so, it was very important a lot of times to do circuitry all in the same gate. But you see, now it's not so important because we have these programmable ICs like the FPGA that's on your basis board, right? That field programmable data array IC, which has all different kinds of logic circuitry inside that, you know, your software is going to pick out and, you know, connect up in whatever code design that you come up with. But you see, back in the day, okay, back before these programmable ICs, you had individual ICs that had one type of gate inside. So, you would have an IC that only had AND gates, and an IC that only had OR gates, and an IC that only had inverters, okay, and so on. And you see, back then, it was often cost effective to do everything, have your entire logic circuitry in one gate, because if you did everything in one gate, then your purchasing department, wherever you were working, only had to order one type of IC, and they could bulk order it and, save a lot of money. Okay, so, at the component level at one time, it was cost effective a lot of the times to do your design all in one gate, like all NAND gates or all NOR gates. Okay, not so much important anymore, at least on the component level. But still nowadays, when they make circuitry inside the IC, they make it out of silicon. Now, if you're an EE student, in circuits 1, they cover some manufacturing. They talk a little bit about, what's the process of making an integrated circuit. Now, if you're a CPE student, I know the CPEs that are starting, probably started this last fall. I think they're taking a new circuits electronic sequence, like 115, is it 115, 215, 315, something like that. And I'm not sure about that new sequence, how much manufacturing that they cover. But if you ever take any class, or if you just on your own, look it up on the internet and see how an IC is made. It's basically made with imaging techniques. They use a mask, and they use ultraviolet light, and they basically image circuitry onto silicon, to get what they want. And, if you're doing everything with one type of gate, that imaging process is more streamlined. Okay, because you basically would only have to use one of these masks instead of multiple. Okay, so even though it's not as big of a deal as it used to be, it still is important to know in some situations, depending on what area you go work. Okay, if you're working with programmable ICs when you leave here, this isn't so important. But if you're doing any sort of IC manufacturing, or doing something that calls for, you don't have programmable ICs, this does become important. Okay, so like I said, I went over how the NAND is used universally to get these different gates. The activity, one part of the activity. There's two parts to the activity today. But the first part is using a NOR gate to do what I did here. You want to show a NOR gate as a NOT, and there's two ways to do a NOR gate as a NOT. A NOR as an AND, a NOR as an OR, and a NOR as a what did I say? NOR as a NOT, NOR as an AND, then NOR as a NAND, and then NOR as a OR. Those four. Okay. All right, so let's move on now. And the next thing we're going to talk about is NAND, NAND, and NOR, NOR. First, I'm going to show you how to go from an SOP equation to a NAND, NAND. And then we'll see how you go from POS to NOR, NOR. So these are equations from a week ago when we were doing the example with, egg, salsa, and chips. Right? So what form of equation is it? That's SOP, right? It's not a process. And which form of equation is it? POS, product. Okay, well, we're going to go from this expression, SOP, to NAND, NAND. Okay, and the way you do it is first you double knot both sides of the equal sign. You put double knot here, double knot, right? Because if I double knot, I'm not changing anything. So when you double knot a single variable like this, it's the same as just a single variable. But now on this side of the equal sign, we're just going to look at this. Okay, we're just going to look at this bar here and then what's written below it. So we're just ignoring the top bar for the moment. Okay, we're just looking at this. So if you just look at this, you have this term ORed with this term, ORed with this term, ORed with this term, and then the whole thing's knotted. So what kind of gate is that? If you're ORing and then you're knotting the whole thing, what kind of gate? That's a NOR. See, this is NOR with inputs, not C, G, not S, not C, G, S, C, not G, not S, and C, not G. So again, keep an eye on what I'm doing. If I make a mistake, let me know. Okay, but this is a NOR with these four terms as inputs. And from De Morgan's, here's De Morgan again, right? From De Morgan's, we know that a NOR is equal to what? Well, from De Morgan's, you know a NAND is equal to what? What did we say earlier? A NAND is equal to what by De Morgan? Up here, what is it? An OR with inverted inputs. So a NAND, or excuse me, that's a NAND, a NOR, it's similar. It's an AND with inverted inputs, right? Yeah, so this is equal to an AND with inverted inputs. So we're going to take each one of these inputs of the NOR, invert it, and then AND it. Okay, so I'm going to take this input, invert it, and then AND it. This input inverted, and AND it. That input inverted, and then AND it with this input inverted. So you see, we're going from this part of this equation to this by using De Morgan's, right? That a NOR is equal to an AND with inverted inputs. Now, remember, we ignored the top bar, right? That wasn't part of this derivation here, but it's still there. So now we'll put it back. So you see, I do De Morgan's once after I double knot. I do De Morgan's once, and I end up with this expression. And this is NAND NAND. You see why it's NAND NAND? Because this is a NAND expression, right? These inputs are ANDed together and then inverted, right? NAND, NAND, NAND. And then these NANDs are ANDed together and the whole thing inverted. So that's why it's called NAND NAND. Now, remember we drew the circuit diagrams, the logic diagrams that showed the gate symbols for an SOP? And what did that look like? What does an SOP logic diagram or logic circuit diagram look like? How do we get these terms? What kind of gate do we need for these terms? And then those terms that are ANDed are then ORed together, right? For SOP. So what did the diagram look like? Right, it had multiple ANDs and they all went to a single OR, right? Remember that? It looked like this. Yeah, we'd have an AND for each of the terms. Right, and then the output would all go to a OR gate, right? I'm gonna erase this in a minute because we had it before, but I'm just reminding you, right? Does it sound familiar now, right? And these were like re-input ANDs, so they were like this. Okay, that was SOP. Okay, so everybody remember now? I can erase it. Should be in your notes already because we did this last week. All right, well, a NAND, what do you think that NAND logic circuit looks like? It's all NAND gates, right? Because as we said earlier, these terms are NANDs, right? So each term is going to be a NAND. Right, you're going to have three inputs. This is not C, this is G, this is not S. Then you have not C, G, oops, that's a G, not a 6. not CGS. And C, not G, not S. And C, not G, S. If I make a mistake, sometimes I miss a not. Okay, but then the outputs of all these NANDs go to another NAND. So you know, at the output of each of these NANDs, you're gonna have these inputs ANDed together and then all knotted. So for example, the output of this NAND will be that term. Right? And the output of this NAND here, right, will be that term. This term is this output, this term is that output. And then your output of this last NAND here, that's this equation. Right? Because each one of these outputs is ANDed together and then the whole thing knotted, right? And that's how we get this expression. All right, so you see why it's called NAND? Everybody good? All right, well, if that made sense, the next thing we're going to do is very simple. Okay, I'm going to show you how you go from POS, product of sums, to NOR. Okay, so here's our POS, like we said earlier. So you double knot both sides. Again, this is the same as E. And now we're just looking at this. Again, we're ignoring the top bar. We're just looking at this bottom bar with what's below it. So look what you have. You have this term ANDed with this term, ANDed with this term, ANDed with this term, and then the whole thing's knotted. So what kind of gate is that? ANDed together, the whole thing knotted is what? Right, a NAND, yeah, not AND or a NAND, yeah, exactly. And then from De Morgan's, like we said earlier, from De Morgan's, we know a NAND is the same as an OR with inverted inputs. So you see, this is a NAND with inputs C or G or S, C or G or not S, not C or not G or S, not C or not G, not S, right? So you see, this is a NAND with these four inputs, and now from De Morgan's, a NAND is equal to an OR with inverted inputs. So I'm going to take each one of these inputs, each one of these terms, knot it, and then OR it with the next one. So you see, this is going to become right. So I'm taking that term, knotting that term, then OR this, OR with this. Yeah, I can squeeze this one again. I'm running out of space. So you see what we did here? That's a NAND. And that's the same as an OR with inverted inputs. And then, of course, we put back this top bar. And look what we have. We have a NOR here, a NOR here, a NOR here, a NOR here, and then those NORs are being ORed and a whole thing knotted. So you see, this is a NOR expression. And what do you think the diagram for a NOR looks like? A NAND looks like that. So what do you think a NOR looks like? Yeah, it's just the same diagram with NOR gates instead of NAND gates. So you would have 4 NOR gates. And 3 inputs. And you got another NOR gate here. All these outputs go to that NOR gate. Okay, that's why it's called NOR, right? NAND, NOR. You know, they could have called SOP, I suppose, you know, like and or in POS, like or and. I mean, they probably could have done that, but for whatever reason, they went with SOP and POS because of how it looks with the baseline equation. But this is called NAND because each level is a NAND, NOR because each level is a NOR. All right. Okay, so any questions up to this point? We're good, doing good for time here. We'll probably finish in another 20 minutes, but any questions up to this point? Okay, so now I realize the first time you do anything, it's not necessarily easy, but relatively speaking, NAND to SOP or SOP to NAND and NOR to POS and POS to NOR is fairly easy. Okay. I mean, if you compare it to what we had to do to go from SOP to POS and POS to SOP last week, remember that took 2 De Morgans, right? It took 2 steps involving De Morgan. You know, this only requires 1 step of De Morgan. So, I mean, if you're considering steps level of ease, then, you know, this is easier than that. See, also, okay, let's go back to what we started with here, right? Remember, we started with SOP and we had to do the double knotting and everything to do the derivation. But now, see, if you wanted to go from NAND to SOP, it's pretty easy to remember how to do it because look, these are the terms of the SOP, right? If I'm looking at my NAND expression, these are the same terms as in my SOP. So all I have to do to go from NAND to SOP is just get rid of these knots up top and change these ands to ors, and I get my SOP. Okay, likewise over here, to go from NOR to POS, well, here are my terms of my POS. I just got to get rid of the knots and change these ors to ands. Okay, so you know it's fairly easy. Again, when you're first learning something, it's not necessarily easy, but compared to other things, it's fairly easy to do any of these back and forth. It's not so easy. It requires more work to go from NAND to POS or NOR to SOP. Okay? And that's what we're going to do next, because to go from NAND to POS, you're going to see involves a K-map. And to go from NOR to SOP requires a K-map. Okay? So it's a little bit more work, okay, than this here. No K-map was involved here. Okay. All right, so let's see how this is done with an example. So let's start with this one here. We're going to go from NAND to POS. And as an example, here's our NAND expression. So like I just said a moment ago, to go from NAND to SOP, you're just taking the terms of the NAND expression and then ORing them together. So you see, I'm just taking AC, right, this term, and then ORing it with not CD, and then ORing it with not A, B, C. And so that's why I was just talking about a moment ago over here. Okay, so everybody see what I did here? Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put this equation here, this SOP for F, we're going to put it into a K-map. So, this is a little bit different than what we did last week or last class on Tuesday. Remember, last class, Tuesday, when we were doing examples K-map and you did the activity, you would have the K-map, right? The K-map would be filled out, and then you would write the equation from the K-map, right? The reduced equation from the K-map. Here we're going the other way. Here we're taking an equation and putting it in the K-map. So since this is F, what am I going to put in the K-map based on this equation? Zeros or ones? Or ones, right? Because it's F, right? Remember, it's F, it has to do with ones. If it's not F, it has to do with zeros. Okay? So you just go term by term and you just put in the appropriate grouping of ones. So let's start with this term here, AC. First of all, a two variable term with a 16 cell K-map. What grouping is that? How many, what question?
So are we going to SOP or POS?
This is SOP here. See, right here, we went from nan to SOP.
Yeah.
And anytime you go into a K-map, just like anytime you go into a truth table, you want to be in SOP form. Okay, so now we're taking this SOP equation and we're writing the K-map for it. Okay, did that answer your question? Okay. So this term here, AC, how many number grouping is that? Four, right? It's going to be a grouping of 4 ones. So where is that grouping of 4 ones going to be? Yeah, the bottom right. Everybody see that right here, right? Everybody agree? But these 4, they're all in the A rows and they're all in the C column. So that's that term. I'll take care of that one. Okay, how about the next term, not CD? Where are the ones going to go for that term? This column here? Okay, does everybody agree? Right here, we have 4 ones. Right, not CD. Right, this is the not C column, it's also the D column, so that's correct. Okay, one more term, not A, B, not C. Now, what number grouping is that? It's a 3 variable, right? It's 2. So where is that 2 grouping going to be? What cells? Four and 5. Everybody agree? Right? 4 and 5, not A, B, not C. Right? So does everybody see how we did it? We're just going reverse what you did last class. Right? Remember last class you had this and you went that way. This time we're going from here to here. Right? If you can do something in both directions, that usually means you have a good understanding of it. Okay. All right, so wherever the ones aren't, that's where the zeros are going to be. So let's use a different color for the zeros. So we'll have a 0 here, 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 a 0 here. I didn't miss any. Okay, so remember what we're trying to do now. Remember, we're trying to get to POS, right? Reduce POS. So again, think back to things we've already done, right? That if we want F for POS, what do we need? What do we got to start with in order to get POS for F? We need what? Remember from last week? If you have SOP and POS, right, to go either direction, you got to do De Morgan's twice. And what's going to happen when you do De Morgan's twice? Convert everything and what else? Okay, that's the key thing, right? So, since we want POS for F, we want SOP for not F, right? Because when we do De Morgan's twice, to get POS, everything's going to invert. Ands go to ors go to ands. All right. So you see from this K-map now, in order to get the POS, we want the SOP for not F. The SOP for not. Okay, that's a key point. So everyone understand why, right? Because again, we're trying to get POS for F. So you got to start with the opposite for SOP. How do you do the what? Oh, how we got this row of ones for this? Are you asking, because what we did here for this term, we did this 4 grouping here. Are you asking where we got this? Oh, you did? Well, remember that if you have a 2 variable term with a 16 cell, that's a 4 grouping. Yeah, so any 2 variables are 4. Are you good now? Oh, okay. All right, so we need to group the zeros now to get the SOP for nada. Okay, so how are you going to group these zeros? Yeah, you could do these four, right? Okay, and what term is that for grouping going to give us? Right, they're all in the not A rows and they're all in the C column, so that's going to be not AC. Okay, what would you group next? Which ones? These two? Okay, we can do these two. Okay, so what term is that going to give us? I think I heard it. A, and then what? Not C, not D. Okay. Everybody agree? They're both in the A, not C, not D. That looks good to me. All right, what would you group next? We still got this 0 up here. You do the 0 and the 2. Now, this is another example. You're correct, but this is another example where there's 2 correct solutions, because when I did this, I did 0 and 8. But you can also do 0 and 2. So you see to be 2 correct solutions. We'll do 0 and 2. All right, so 0 and 2. What are those? What's that grouping going to give us? Let's say I heard A, or not A. Not A. And then what? Not B. And not D. Yeah. Okay, I agree. Yeah. Not A row, not B row. And yeah, not D. Sometimes not D is hard to see, but yeah, you guys got it good. All right. So you see that's SOP for nada. So now the last step is to do De Morgan's twice, right? To get POS correct. And this is where everything inverts, ands the ors the ands, right? So we're gonna get, now if I make a mistake, correct me. Let's see. A or not C, and that's ended with A or C, B ended with A or B. Did I make any mistakes? Did I invert everything? And these ands went to ors, and those ors went to ands, right? It's always good to double check when you do this, because it's so easy to miss a knot or, you know, have a plus where it's not supposed to be. Or so just be careful, because most of the time when people make mistakes on this, they're just not careful. You know, just got to double check this. You know, I make mistakes all the time. I catch it the second time I look at it. Okay, so really the added thing compared to when you go either nan to SOP or SOP to nan, when you go nan to POS, it's just you're going to have to go through a change. That's really the added thing. Okay. All right. Well, very similarly, to go from nor to SOP also involves a change. So let's do this example. So you see, we're starting with the nor, right? Because this is a nor here, this is a nor, then these two are or and all knotted. So right, nor. Okay, so to go from nor to POS, we just take each term and just end it with the other term here. So we're going to take A or C and just end it with not B or D. Right. So effectively, again, what's happening here is you're getting rid of the knots and then just changing this or here between the terms to a E. Right, and that gives us POS right now. All right, but we want to go into a truth table. So what do we want to do next? Because what form do you want when you go into a truth table or a K-map? Yeah, you want SOP, right? So we're going to do De Morgan's twice here to get SOP, and it'll be SOP for what? Right, not right, exactly. So it'll be SOP for not F So again, make sure I don't make a mistake here, so invert A, that 4 goes to an and, this goes to an or, then we'll have B, right, so did I get this right? Those are inverted, and this is or, inverted. Okay, everybody agree I didn't make a mistake? All right, so now, since this is not F, when I go into a K-map, what am I gonna write here? Zeros, okay? So where are the zeros going to be for this term? Not A, not C. Over here, correct? These 4? Right? Not A, not C. Okay, so that takes care of that term. Okay, how about this next term? B, not D. Yep, right here. Because remember with K-maps, right, the edges touch. Yeah, so see, this group of 4 is B, not D, right? Because that group of 4, it's in the B rows and it's in the not D columns. Okay, so everybody agree we put this equation into the K-map? Okay, so everywhere else is going to be a 1. Wherever there's not a 0, there's a 1. And now, if I group the 1s, I'm going to get my reduced SOP for F. Right, which is what we want, right? So, what are you going to group first? Want to do the bottom 4? Okay, that's a group of 4, yeah. And what term is that bottom 4 going to give us? Yep, A, B, not. Everybody agree? Very good. All right, let's do another grouping here. What do you want to do? Okay, right here. Is that's what you said, right? Yeah, right here. All right, so this group here, this 4 group, what is it going to give us? AD, yeah. Okay, what's next? Always the same person. How about somebody over here? This side's been quiet. Okay, this column, okay. All right, and what term is that going to give us? This column. CD, yeah. All right, so we just have what? We haven't taken care of this 1 over here. So what are you going to do with that 1? Remember, these edges touch. These edges touch and also these edges touch. 3, 2, what? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can do this. Right? 3, 2, 11, 10. That group of 4. See, people often miss that. That's a common miss. But yeah, remember again, these edges touch. Just like these edges. Okay, so what term is this 4 grouping going to give us? Okay, not B what? C. Not B, C, yeah. Okay. All right, so does everybody agree? Now, notice, if I wanted to, I could then take this SOP and go to NaN, right? Just by doing this. So if I just went 1 step more, right? Once you have that SOP, you can easily go to NaN with 1 De Morgan's. That would be NOR to NaN. And then likewise here, once you have POS, this 1 step, 1 De Morgan's, you can get NOR. So if we did 1 more step, it would be NaN to NOR. Okay, but the key point is, these back and forth are fairly easy. These you got to go through a K-map. Now, if you think about it, really today's class there was only really two new things today, right? Two main points that were new. One was, what a universal gate is, which again, it's just you can get any gate from a universal gate, and the only universal gates are NAND and OR. You cannot get all the gates from an AND or all the gates from an OR. Okay, it's not possible. Okay, you need to have that inversion factor to be a universal gate. But that was new. And then, NAND, NAND, and NOR, that was new. But everything else today, if you think about it, was stuff we talked about before. Like I would say 80% of what we went over in class today was review of things we talked about before, SOP to POS, K-map, right? We talked about those gates before, okay? So I bring that up because if things made sense today, like if this lecture made sense, once you do the activity and finish up lab one, if you feel like you're having a good understanding, that's a really good sign up to this point. That means you're getting it up to this point. Okay, so you can use that kind of as a measuring stick, if you will, because if things, don't seem so clear, then, you may have to do additional work or, ask me questions and get up to speed. Okay. All right. Let me show you the activity and then what's left to do for lab one on Canvas. And then you can get started. Now, before I put the screen down, here are the answers to the activity. And then this is the black box diagram, or what your black box diagram for lab one should look like. There should be 4 inputs and 3 outputs because, after Tuesday's class where you knew, SOP and POS, that was 2 of the 3. The third one that you can now add based on this class is NOR. Okay, if you're going to have one output that's SOP, one that's POS, and one that's NOR. So like I said on Tuesday, if you were able to get a good simulation for part 1, like you have your POS and your SOP working the way it should, you'll probably finish the lab today after the activity because all you have to do, part 2, add a third output, which is the NOR. Okay, so let me just show you what's on Canvas for the activity. Okay, so just like the other activities, they're on Canvas under the meeting. This is meeting 4. So the first part of the activity is just doing what I did with the NANDs with the NORs. So show how you can make an OR out of just NORs, a NOT, an AND, then also include NAND. So there should be 4, just like I did 4. Okay, I forgot to put NAND on. Okay, so that's the first part of the activity. The second part of the activity has to do with NAND and NOR. So, number 1 here is to take this truth table and draw the reduced NAND circuit. So from this truth table, go to something that looks like this. So since I want reduced in this class, anytime you see the word reduced, what should pop up into your head? K-maps, right? Because that's how we reduce, right? So you want to put this truth table into a K-map, and then from that K-map, get what the NAND circuit should be. Okay? And then the second one is you want to get a NOR expression from this NAND expression. And I kind of gave a hint at that because remember I was talking about, well, if you've got the POS, one more step more, and you've got the NOR. Okay? So that's what the activity is, both of those. And then lab 2 or lab 1, part 2. As I mentioned earlier, it's just adding a third output. Okay, you want to get what the reduced NOR expression is for your lab assignment, and then add an additional output to what you already have. So remember, these different expressions, right? These different logic circuits, they're equivalent, right? They should give you the same truth table. So when you're doing your video demonstration to show that your design works, you're going to have 3 LEDs, right? An LED for each output. And as you go through the truth table, now there's 4 inputs. So how many combinations of inputs do you have? 16. So you're gonna, in your video, you're gonna have to show all 16 input combinations with the switches. And should those lights be in sync? Right, they should. They should all be off at the same time, agreeing with the truth table. They should all be on at the same time, agreeing with the truth table. If you don't have that, if you have like 2 in sync and one isn't, the one that isn't, you probably have an error with that equation, whatever it may be, either SOP, POS, or NOR. Okay? And then one other thing I want to mention, just because this question has come up a lot, and that's, do both people have to be shown in the video when you do your demonstration? Now, I didn't make it a requirement. I think in the future I will, but I didn't make both people being in the video a requirement. So if you don't have both people, you won't lose any points. But I strongly recommend that you do that. I think it's a really good idea to have both people involved with video, because if you got 2 people, you're less likely to forget something, because you're kind of checking each other, right? Because again, the main reason people lose points on their lab work is they omit stuff. Either they omit a screenshot, or when they're doing their video, they skip a row in the truth table. And if you only show 15 out of the 16 rows, it's not working 100%. Right? The grader can't tell if it's working 100% if you don't do the whole truth table. Just because 15 of the 16 work doesn't mean the 16th one works. There's plenty of times when there's just one row that doesn't work in a truth table. Okay? All right, so do you have any questions before you get started? Because just like previous classes, work on your activity at your table. Once your group is done with the activity, turn it in so you make sure you get credit. And then if you want to go someplace else to do the lab, that's fine. Okay, but if you leave before your group passes in the activity, I had someone do that this morning, you won't get credit. Okay, you have to be physically present during the activity until it's turned in to get credit for that. Okay, so any questions before you get started? All right, if questions come up, please ask. Ethan will be here in about an hour to help out.